December 23, 1995. Chicago. Snowflakes fell in slow, syrupy spirals onto the glass dome of Lakeside Plaza Mall. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and plastic pine. 7-year-old Maggie Collins had just been in line to meet Santa. She tugged on her mother's coat, pointed at a doll display, and took a few steps toward it. Just a few. When her mother turned around, Maggie was gone. Not wandering, not lost. Gone. No cameras caught it. Maintenance day. No one saw her leave. That's how it began, with a missing child, a panicked scream, and the slow realization that the walls were keeping secrets no one would find for 25 years. Lakeside Plaza wasn't just a mall, it was a holiday ritual. Families flooded the atrium every December, bundled in coats, dragging mittened kids toward hot pretzels and the North Pole photo booth. That winter, garlands curled around escalator rails, speakers whispered carols, and the Santa line stretched past the fountain. Laura Collins held Maggie's hand tight, laughing as her daughter practiced what she'd say to Santa. Nothing felt strange. Nothing looked off. Just a mother and child in the fluorescent warmth of a suburban winter dream. But under the marble tiles and festive wrapping, something had already shifted, something the holiday lights couldn't hide for long. Maggie Collins was 7 going on 17. She had that wide-eyed, slightly lopsided grin that made strangers smile back without meaning to. Her hair, stubbornly straight and constantly falling into her eyes, was always tucked behind one ear. Just one. She loved strawberry milk, hated green beans with the passion of a seasoned food critic, and had recently declared that when she grew up, she was going to be either a veterinarian, a paleontologist, or a princess who does science. Her world was made of glitter glue, Lisa Frank stickers, and the peculiar magic of mid-90s cartoons. She lived with her parents, Laura and Doug Collins, in a quiet brick duplex on the north side of Chicago. The kind of place where you could hear neighbors arguing through thin walls, but still felt safe enough to sleep with the window cracked. Laura worked nights as a nurse, Doug taught high school English, and Maggie was the sun they orbited. Most mornings, Laura would find a new drawing on the fridge, usually of a lopsided animal wearing a tiara or flying through space. Doug, always half-distracted grading papers, would offer his signature smirk and say, "That hippo is clearly an astronaut. Genius." Weekends were sacred. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Maggie always got to pour the syrup, which led to soggy towers of sweetness Laura pretended to enjoy. Sundays were for library trips. Maggie's backpack bulged with picture books and early readers, and she insisted on checking out the same dog-eared copy of Curious George Rides a Bike every week. It wasn't that she loved the story, though she did, but that she believed George was waiting for her, and it would be rude not to say hello. She had friends, sure, but Maggie wasn't the queen bee type. She was more the sidekick, the giggler, the one who shared her fruit snacks and let other kids use her crayons. Her best friend, Ellie Marks, lived down the block. They built blanket forts in Maggie's room and made elaborate spy club missions involving string traps, walkie-talkies, and a long-suffering cat named Pickles. The two of them had a secret code and were convinced the postman was hiding something. For Laura and Doug, she was more than just a child. She was the unexpected harmony in their adult noise. Laura used to joke that Maggie had arrived early, a surprise pregnancy just after they'd paid off Laura's student loans. But they both knew she had changed everything, made it better, deeper. Doug, the eternal realist, softened in her presence. Laura, perpetually anxious and overworked, would pause just to watch Maggie sleep, marveling that something so fragile could also be so profoundly solid. Maggie had her quirks. She insisted on sleeping with her socks on, kept all her crayon stubs in a mason jar labeled soldiers, and talked to the bathroom mirror like it was a friend. She hated thunder, but loved rain, and once stayed up all night trying to count lightning strikes during a summer storm. When asked why, she said, It's how angels clap. There were no dark omens, no shadows in the corner, just a life. Just a little girl who liked unicorns, played hopscotch badly, and once cried for an hour because her snowman melted. She had never wandered off before. She wasn't the kind of child to slip away unnoticed. That was the worst part. If she had been careless, if she had been rebellious, maybe it would have made sense. But nothing about Maggie Collins disappearing ever made sense. The strangeness wasn't in how it happened, but in how quickly the ordinary twisted into the unimaginable. One moment, a child bouncing with excitement in a mall line. The next, nothing but the echo of a name yelled into empty space. But before the storm, there was Maggie's laughter, thick winter coats, and the distant jingle of bells. A moment locked in amber, perfect and fragile. December 23, 1995, started like every other Saturday that month, with too much sugar and too little patience. Maggie had been up since 6, vibrating with excitement. She ran through the house in her red and green socks, clutching her Santa letter in both hands. Laura, bleary-eyed from her night shift at St. Bridget's, was still nursing a mug of black coffee when Maggie burst in wearing a sweater with a reindeer that played music if you pressed its nose. Doug was already gone, off to grade finals before the school shut down for the holidays. That morning, it was just the two of them. A mother and her daughter, wrapped in layers, stepping out into the brittle cold of a Chicago December. The sky hung low and gray, but the city pulsed with festive cheer. Window displays flickered with electric snow, carolers gathered outside bakeries, and the streets smelled of roasted nuts and diesel fumes. They took the Blue Line downtown. Maggie sat beside the window, face pressed to the glass, narrating the journey like a tour guide. That's where we saw the big dog in a sweater. That's where the man dropped his whole coffee. At the mall, Lakeside Plaza buzzed with families and flashing lights. Santa's village had been set up near the central atrium, complete with synthetic snow, elves on stilts, and a gingerbread house that smelled suspiciously like plastic. They got in line. Maggie couldn't stand still. She bounced on her heels, rehearsing what she would ask for. "A Polly Pocket," she said first. Then, "No, wait, one of those dolls that eats, and then poops." Laura laughed and told her to pick one wish so Santa wouldn't get confused. Maggie frowned, thinking, "Okay, I want a time machine so I can see dinosaurs, or maybe go back to when you were little." There was no sense of danger, no foreboding music playing in the background, just the soft hum of the mall, the chatter of shoppers, the sound of camera shutters clicking. Laura checked her watch. They'd been in line for about 20 minutes when Maggie spotted a new window display, an elaborate scene with animatronic dolls dancing around a Christmas tree. "Can I go look?" she asked, tugging her mother's sleeve. Laura, distracted, scanned the area. The window was barely 30 feet away. She could see it from where she stood. "Okay," she said, "but stay where I can see you." Maggie nodded, flashing that crooked grin, and skipped off. Laura turned back to her purse, fumbling for the camera. It took less than a minute, maybe 30 seconds. When she looked back, Maggie was gone. At first, it didn't register. The crowd shifted. Maybe Maggie was just behind someone taller. Laura craned her neck, stepped out of the line, scanning faces. "Mags?" she called. "Sweetie?" Still smiling. Still thinking this was a game. But Maggie didn't answer. Laura walked over to the display, expecting to find her daughter crouched near the window, hypnotized by the dolls. Nothing. She looked left, right, down the hallway toward the food court. Her voice sharpened. "Maggie!" Heads turned. A woman gave her a tight smile, sympathetic but unconcerned. She checked the toy store, the photo booth, the bathroom hallway. The sense of dread settled slowly, like frost forming on glass. After 15 minutes, Laura flagged down a security guard. "She was right here," she said, voice brittle. She was right here. The mall didn't shut down, not at first. Announcements were made, descriptions given. But it was 2 days before Christmas. Shoppers kept shopping. Music kept playing. Somewhere, kids were screaming with joy. Somewhere else, a mother was screaming in panic. Later, people would ask Laura if she'd noticed anything strange. Had Maggie said anything odd? Had anyone been watching them? But there had been no shadow in the corner, no man in a long coat lurking in the background. Only one thing stood out, barely. That morning, before they left, Maggie had been unusually quiet while tying her shoes. Laura asked what was wrong. Maggie looked up and said, "I had a dream about the mall, but it was empty. All the lights were off, and I couldn't find the doors." Laura didn't think much of it at the time. Just a dream. Just a child's mind mixing excitement with nerves. But in hindsight, the memory would replay in her head like a cracked cassette, over and over, distorted by guilt. Everything had seemed ordinary until it shattered, and no one could say when exactly the glass had cracked. At 12:48 p.m., Maggie Collins stepped away from the Santa line at Lakeside Plaza. At 12:49, she was gone. Witnesses later described the moment as nothing unusual. A child veering off toward a toy display. Who hasn't seen that? The window she approached was decorated like a miniature North Pole village. Tiny mannequins in elf costumes jerked and twitched in looping gestures. Fake snow blew from hidden fans, and music tinkled from hidden speakers. To a 7-year-old, it was Wonderland. To a predator, it was cover. Laura Collins walked those 30 feet within 2 minutes. She thought Maggie had knelt to look closer, or maybe ducked behind the display to peer at something. When she didn't see her, she circled the display twice, then twice more. That's when her voice changed, not calling out in irritation now, but panic, the same way a person might shout into a fog. Security was alerted at 12:57 p.m. A team of 3 guards responded and began what they described as a routine sweep. They checked the toy stores, bathrooms, dressing rooms, even the ice cream counter. A few thought maybe Maggie had wandered to the food court, lured by the promise of cinnamon pretzels or free samples. But the food court didn't know her name. No one there remembered her. By 1:12 p.m., Laura was crying so hard she could barely speak. "She was just here," she kept repeating. "I was right here." One guard radioed his supervisor. One called the city police. But the mall remained open. It was peak holiday traffic. There were lines out the door. Shutting down would mean a financial hemorrhage. Managers weren't ready for that. Police arrived at 1:28 p.m. Officers Kramer and Lung, both veterans of domestic disturbances and shoplifting calls, were the first on the scene. They interviewed Laura. They interviewed staff. They requested security footage. That's when they hit the first wall. All security cameras in the West Wing, including the Santa line, the doll display, and 3 exit corridors, were offline. This was explained as scheduled maintenance, ongoing since the 20th. "Bad timing," someone muttered. Someone else said, "Coincidence." A mall-wide sweep began at 1:45 p.m. Over 40 employees joined. Stores were asked to check their back rooms. Employees opened locked doors. Someone said they thought they'd seen a girl in a red sweater by the parking garage stairwell. Another swore they'd heard a scream near the movie theater. Neither lead went anywhere. Neither was her. By 3 p.m., the mall was in full lockdown mode, though it wasn't publicly announced. Employees guarded exits. Plainclothes officers paced the halls. They used Maggie's name over the intercom twice, softly, kindly. "Maggie Collins, your mother is looking for you. Please come to the information desk." It echoed off tile and linoleum like a prayer. Laura refused to leave the display window. She stood in front of it like it owed her answers. People stared, walked around her, whispered. A photographer for the Chicago Herald snapped a picture of her, mascara running, mouth half open. That photo would be front page by morning. above the fold. Caption: Missing. At 4:12 p.m., they began asking shoppers to leave. Slowly, politely, Christmas music still played, eerily cheerful against the rising tension. Jingle Bell Rock over the speakers. Somewhere, a kid cried because Santa had gone home early. Somewhere else, a mother refused to move from a spot on the tile floor. By 5 p.m., Lakeside Plaza was empty. They searched into the night. Flashlights in janitor closets, police dogs sniffing around dumpsters, helicopters with heat sensors combed rooftops. But you can't track what doesn't leave footprints. No one remembered a scream. No one remembered a hand-grabbing. No one remembered anything. And then there was the worst discovery. All the mall's exits had been watched by staff or customers. No one had seen Maggie leave. No man carrying a child. No child crying. No sign of a struggle. It was as if she had just evaporated. At 6:45 p.m., Doug Collins arrived. He had driven straight from school, eyes wild, tie askew, papers still in the passenger seat. When Laura saw him, she collapsed. That night, they took her statement 3 separate times. Each time, she told them the same thing. I never looked away. I swear, just for a second. Just for 1 second. Officers stayed until nearly midnight. A final sweep turned up nothing. They brought in mall blueprints, marked each service door, crossed off each utility corridor. But not one led to an answer. The next morning, the Collins home was already ringed with reporters. Someone leaked the photo. It showed a happy girl with wind-blown hair, arms mid-flap, like she was about to take flight. Below it, Chicago Girl 7 vanishes in mall. The disappearance of Maggie Collins wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was surgical, clean, precise, and impossibly fast. And as the sun came up over a city dressed in holiday lights, one question gripped the hearts of everyone who heard the story. Where could a little girl go in a building with no way out? Within an hour of Maggie's disappearance, Lakeside Plaza became an impromptu command center. At 6 p.m., Chief Investigator Marisol Vega of the Chicago PD arrived. Her winter coat was dusted with snow, her voice crisp with command. She ordered immediate measures, lock down all exits, establish triage stations at each entrance, and equip every available officer with Maggie's photo and a flashlight. Volunteers, staff, and shoppers converged as search teams. They formed human chains, swept corridors, restrooms, storerooms, even maintenance shafts. Excel printouts of mall blueprints littered the floor, corridors crossed off in colored markers. Meanwhile, Detective Kramer, a hulking man with weathered features, called in canine units. 2 German shepherds, trained for tracking, entered the frigid mall. They sniffed every corner, every trash bin, every backroom doorway. One stopped at an escalator shaft, the other at a locked janitorial closet door. The door creaked open, empty but for a mop bucket and paper towels. No trace of Maggie. On the food court's underside, they found traces of hair, light brown, similar color to Maggie's, but lab results later determined it belonged to a shopper's toddler. Another lead, a disgruntled teenage employee, reported a tall man in a long coat who'd asked oddly detailed questions about Santa's schedule. But CCTV was offline, so his identity remained ghostly. Parallel to the search, Laura and Doug were escorted into a makeshift interview room. A dark polished table, vinyl chairs, bright overhead light. They were asked again and again what Maggie was wearing. Red sweater, dark jeans, Velcro sneakers, hair tied with a green ribbon. They answered in hushed, trembling tones. Each question felt like salt on an open wound. The detectives maintained professional calm, noting every pause, every quiver. They took photographs of the scarf Maggie had worn, a bright green knit, and preserved it in an evidence bag, hoping to recover DNA. Laura's phone buzzed nonstop, calls from reporters, angry questions, rumors. Did you quarrel before coming? Are you hiding something? Their grief became public performance, sorrow broadcast under mall lights. Inside the control room, Marisol Vega coordinated communications with the city's missing persons unit. A bulletin was sent statewide. A child abducted at Lakeside Plaza, believed to be in danger. Amber Alert systems were still nascent, just implemented that year, but Chicago PD utilized every resource: regional TV stations, highway billboards, police scanners. The alert would reach neighboring states by midnight. Meanwhile, uniformed officers fanned out beyond the mall, interviewing trash collectors who'd emptied bins early that evening, questioning late-shift uniform cleaners who cared for the Santa props. Everyone in the building became a person of interest until proven otherwise. By 8 p.m., media caravans had formed outside third-floor entrances. Reporters shouted into megaphones, flashing cameras. Searchlights from news helicopters swiveled over the roof. Inside, Vega's team paused to debrief. They'd covered every public area twice. They believed the abductor must have known the building intimately, might have used service tunnels or emergency exits. They ordered mechanical rooms unlocked for inspection. It was then that an electrician discovered a corridor locked from the inside, painted over, previously unmapped in official blueprints, and panels had been replaced recently. That would become the hottest lead. Yet with every door cracked open, every closet searched, every witness interviewed, the net only tugged on emptiness. Maggie had moved through all of it, if she'd moved at all, and disappeared. At midnight, exhausted officers retreated to makeshift stations. Laura and Doug were driven home in separate cars, surrounded by silent police cruisers. Their home would become another investigation site in the morning. But tonight, under a Chicago sky thick with snow, there was only one certainty. The system had been activated, but it had not found Maggie. And as midnight stretched, that certainty burned cold. From the early hours after Maggie's disappearance, the investigation unfolded like a tense, slow-motion puzzle. Marisol Vega declared it a top priority missing person case, assigning a squad of detectives, crime scene analysts, media liaisons, canine units, and uniformed officers to Lakeside and its surroundings. They built a temporary precinct inside the mall's former food court, rows of desks, case files stacked behind yellow tape, surveillance footage from neighboring businesses projected onto monitors. Investigators pored over blueprints and maintenance plans. They traced Maggie's last known trajectory, marking points of interest: the Santa line, the doll display, the locked corridor discovered that night. Crime scene techs dusted tiles for prints, swabbed surfaces for trace evidence, examined dirt in cracks. They sent hair and fiber samples to labs. They cross-referenced Maggie's DNA profile against an ever-growing list of leads. Detectives re-interviewed families, store clerks, and Santa's helpers. Many remembered a blonde girl in red, then dismissed her among dozens of others. But some glimpsed something odd: a woman crying in the bathroom, a teenage boy following Maggie at a distance, a cleaning staff member who said he saw HVAC maintenance workers entering after hours. No one's memory was consistent. One woman's account stood out. She was shopping with her toddler at 1 p.m., saw a flash of red behind a pillar, and thought it was Maggie. But that child turned out not to be Maggie. It still weighed on everyone's nerves. Tech teams scoured service tunnels, crawl spaces, hollowed walls. They examined utility closets, like the one unlocked that night, and discovered old wiring conduits snaking through ceilings. They pulled back ceiling panels in corridors and storerooms. No signs of Maggie, but they cataloged every anomaly: a fresh drywall joint, a relocated sprinkler head, fresh plaster near the HVAC intake. Police built staff logs: who worked when, who had keys, who was recently hired. Maintenance logs revealed contractors had replaced drywall panels multiple times that month. One worker, Michael Reynolds, handled much of the West Wing service work. His name later surfaced in a troubling anecdote. He'd argued with store managers over pay and vanished from records soon after. He became a person of interest. An anonymous tip came in. The girl is in the old utility room behind the elevator. A team descended, opened a locked service closet. The door swung open on fresh hinges. Inside, only cobwebs. CCTV revealed a suspicious man entering via back access 10 days earlier, but the video was blurry. They ran the image through criminal databases. No match, no mugshots. Laura Collins attended news conferences wearing the same green scarf she'd worn that day. She fought to keep composure, appealing to the public. "Please," she said, voice quivering. "Anyone who saw something unusual, no matter how small, please come forward." The case dominated local news. Nationwide coverage followed. The public submitted hundreds of tips, leading to 50 detectives working round the clock. 3 weeks in, frustration grew. Labs hadn't returned results. Tips dried up. Detectives found no mail-order purchases or toy store camera purchases that linked to Maggie's clothing or doll requests. Mall management resisted further disruption. They feared liability, insurance claims. Detectives butted heads with lawyers who threatened lawsuits. Detectives worked 12 to 16-hour shifts. Some developed insomnia. Others admitted in closed-door debriefs that they were haunted by Laura's voice. She was just there. One after another, they realized that every false lead, every dead end, was a personal loss. One detective, quietly in his voice recorder, said, "If we don't find her, Maggie becomes a ghost to everyone here." At the end of week 4, the lab reported finding red fibers on a service corridor beam. They matched the thread of Maggie's sweater. They also pulled a partial fingerprint from a pipe handle near the locked drywall. This print matched no one in the local system, as cross-state criminal databases were limited in 1995. Insurance adjusters halted all service access, demanding chain of custody logs. And the fingerprint data expired in the system, gone. Still, the fibrous clue reinvigorated the task force. They began re-interviewing maintenance workers from the 90s, scouring city records for contractors. But each day there was less certainty. Maggie remained unseen. By the end of the month, the investigation had charted every inch of Lakeside Plaza. The walls had been crawled, dusted, measured. Every staffer interviewed, every shopper questioned. A web of clues and contradictions lay across the crime board like an unfinished tapestry, threads leading nowhere or not yet unraveled. And when detectives finally shut down the temporary precinct in the food court, exchanging files for cardboard boxes, they carried one clear truth. They had enough doubt, but too little evidence. The investigation was grinding forward, but it was stalled without a break. The quiet hum of unresolved questions filled every empty storefront. By February 1996, snow had turned to slush, and Maggie's missing posters had begun to peel from telephone poles and storefront windows. The bright red letters spelling missing faded under winter rain. Chicago moved on. The city had other problems, other stories. The media began covering new scandals, new tragedies. Lakeside Plaza returned to business as usual, albeit with tighter security and fewer shoppers. The place now carried a strange weight, a hum of unease that made families clutch their children tighter, made store owners glance more often at their exits. The task force was reduced by half. Detectives were reassigned to active cases. Vega was pulled onto a homicide investigation in Lincoln Park. Only 2 officers were left on the Collins file, and even they admitted quietly. Unless a new lead surfaced, there was little more they could do. The wall of photos and timelines came down. Maps were rolled up and filed. The folding tables in the food court were carted away. It was over, not officially, but it was over. Laura refused to accept it. She held candlelight vigils outside the mall every Saturday. Sometimes just 2 people showed up, sometimes a dozen. She made flyers at her own expense. She faxed them to every police station within 100 miles. She called local radio shows, weeping into phone lines, begging strangers to remember her daughter's name. Doug had grown silent, withdrawn after weeks of overwhelming stress and grief. He started sleeping on the couch, often staring blankly at the TV until late hours. When he moved out that spring, he left without a fight, emotionally shut down by the ordeal. The divorce papers came quietly through the mail. The Collins home turned into a shrine. Maggie's room remained untouched. Her drawings were still on the fridge, curling at the corners. Her toothbrush sat in the cup by the sink. Laura would sit in her daughter's closet for hours, breathing in the faint scent of bubblegum shampoo. She began keeping a journal, writing entries addressed to Maggie. "Today I saw a girl who looked like you. She smiled, and I almost called your name. I almost believed." The pages began to fill with questions Laura couldn't answer. "Were you scared? Did someone hurt you? Did you think I stopped looking?" Anonymous tips continued to trickle in. A girl spotted in Indiana. A child matching Maggie's description seen at a bus stop in Milwaukee. A woman in Decatur swore her neighbor had a granddaughter who never went to school. Each lead was investigated. None panned out. One call from a payphone in Ohio claimed, "The girl from Chicago is in a basement." When traced, the line was found to be inactive. Another dead end. Laura kept clippings, created a binder thicker than a phone book, organized by date and color-coded: yellow for confirmed hoaxes, blue for legitimate investigations, red for unsolved tips. She carried it everywhere. She stopped working. Friends stopped calling. Her world shrank to pages and shadows. Her handwriting, once round and cheerful, turned sharp and slanted. Rumors crept in that Laura had made up the story, that Doug had taken Maggie and fled, that it had all been a ploy for attention. Gossip columns speculated. Radio shows joked. A true crime segment mocked the case's lack of drama. A radio host said, "Maybe Maggie just walked into Narnia. Where's the proof she even existed?" Laura heard it driving home once. She pulled over and vomited. One night in May, Laura went to Lakeside Plaza alone. It was almost closing. She wandered the West Wing, past the old display window, now replaced by a pretzel stand. She stood near the escalator, where she remembered seeing Maggie's ponytail bounce for the last time. A security guard asked if she needed help. Laura said, "She's still here." The man didn't answer, just nodded and walked away. The final press conference was held in late March. Vega, exhausted and tight-lipped, said what everyone already knew. "At this time, we have no further leads. The case remains open, but inactive." No reporters asked questions. Laura didn't attend. She watched it from her living room floor, the TV light flickering against her face. Spring came. The snow melted. The city bloomed again, and still, no Maggie. Not a footprint, not a thread of that red sweater, not a trace of that bright green ribbon. The phone stopped ringing. Reporters stopped writing. The world exhaled and moved on. The case was now a drawer, a folder, a number, and for those who remembered, a name whispered like an echo: Maggie Collins. She was just there, and then she wasn't. The quiet that followed never left. It was June 18th, 2020, 25 years, 5 months, and 26 days after Maggie Collins vanished. Lakeside Plaza was half demolished, the West Wing gutted, walls reduced to rubble and dust. At dusk, Edgar Rowley, the night shift security guard from a contractor crew, shuffled along cracked linoleum, flashlight in hand. He was there to monitor broken glass, loose wiring, regular cleanup. Snowmen had made way for summer weeds. The mall still smelled faintly of hot pretzels and stale air. It felt like a graveyard. He paced near the ventilation duct above the former food court. His light caught something odd, a flush section of drywall too smooth, too new. Not demolition grade. He pressed the surface. It resisted. On a hunch, he tapped again. Muffled. He knelt, examined the edge. Fresh chalk dust. He tapped again, harder. The wall shivered. He radioed the site manager. "You gotta come see this." In minutes, 2 workers joined him, flashlights slicing through the collapsing dusk. They pulled away chunks of gypsum. Behind was a narrow cavity, 2 feet deep, 3 wide. The metal studs held intact. Nothing about this fit the demolition plan. The workers looked at each other. Someone had built this. Someone kept it hidden. They widened the opening, revealing a room about 2 by 3 meters, windowless. Dust hung in rays of fading light. In the center lay a collapsed sleeping bag, gray-blue and frayed at the seams. On top, a small plastic tea set, chipped, pastel-colored, the kind Maggie might have loved. Beneath, a folded tent about the size a child could crawl into. Along the back wall, a Polaroid photo peeked out on the floor. A girl with a crooked grin and wind-blown hair, standing next to a hand, resting gently on her shoulder. No adult face. Edgar scooped it up, the image trembling in his hand. They backed away, stunned. The manager called the police. By the time the squad arrived, the cavity had been partially excavated. Dust settled in the stalls. A sense of wrongness filled the air. This wasn't just neglect. It felt intentional. Detectives Marisol Vega, now retired but brought back as a consultant, arrived to assess. She stepped into the cramped space, flashlight in hand. The air tasted stale, compressed. No ventilation. There were smudges on the floor, footprints, partial, small, like 1-week habitation by a child. Against the north wall lay a small spiral notebook. Pages were yellowed, but not brittle. Police documented every inch. The tent, the tea set, the photo. The notebook held crude drawings, a ladder, a black rectangle, a series of stick figures holding hands. Scribbles in a childish hand. "Please don't turn off light." On the back page, a cluster of letters smeared in haste. "Help me." No date, but the paper's edge had torn cleanly, as if torn from a larger pad. The tea set caught heavy dust. The sleeping bag smelled of mold and sweat. Vega pressed her gloves to the fabric. More fibers were collected. The room also contained an old crate with several bottles of water, some half-eaten granola bars, and empty packets of rehydrated child formula. Experts later confirmed that the cavity, though small, had a hairline crack leading to an inactive ventilation shaft, allowing minimal but sufficient airflow for a child to survive for several days, given the provisions. According to forensic specialists, with these supplies and limited air circulation, a child could have survived in the niche for up to 6 days. Outside, reporters gathered near yellow tape. One asked, "Is this Maggie?" Vega remained silent. She did not commit or deny. Inside, the room's silence pressed into her skull. 25 years of quiet, suddenly interrupted by the echo of a child's refuge. This was no hidden storage. This was concealment, survival, captivity, all in one brutal whisper of plasterboard and ductwork. A lab team arrived to photograph and bag evidence. A fiber sample from the sleeping bag matched the red sweater fibers found in 1996. That thread had traveled time. The photo, too, scanned into the system, was run through an archival search. Maggie Collins, circa 1995. Same smile, same hair. No doubt remained. From nowhere to something, from silence to questions. The discovery reignited all that grief, all that unresolved sorrow. The world had forgotten, but this wall remembered. At the end of the night, Vega emerged, blinking in the cold summer air. She spoke quietly. "We finally found her." Behind her, lights illuminated the open cavity, a raw wound in the mall's carcass. Inside, traces of a lost life lay waiting. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning again. The past had stepped out of the wall, demanding answers. Over the next 48 hours, the abandoned room within Lakeside Plaza's gutted West Wing became ground zero for an emotional tsunami. By late evening of June 19, 2020, forensic teams had processed every inch. Fibers from Maggie's red sweater, swabs from the sleeping bag, the Polaroid photo, even the pastel tea set that so eerily matched a child's abandoned play. Every piece was labeled, bagged, cross-examined. The initial lab confirmed what nobody dared to voice. This was Maggie's world, hidden behind walls for a week, a month, even decades. Detective Marisol Vega, back on the case after a quarter-century away, watched the findings with a stone face, though her heart pounded like the mall's old Christmas bells. The lab identified the fibers from the drywall cavity as an exact match to strands recovered in 1996, ensuring that the red thread that once vanished had, in fact, been lying in the dark all this time. The Polaroid's image was run through Missing Children archives and family albums, confirmed by Laura Collins herself. That was Maggie, frozen in a moment of both innocence and fear, a tiny hand pressed against her shoulder, hand unseen, promise unknown. Outside, press vans lined up along the staging area. Curfews, once declared in hushed PD meeting rooms, now belonged to dusty pasts. As dawn broke on June 20th, cameras clicked along the yellow tape. Laura arrived at the mall site with silent steps, clutching the same green scarf she wore 25 years ago. She was escorted past police barricades, asked only to confirm. Did she recognize the photo? With her voice shaking, she whispered, "That was her." A collective gasp echoed, shock, sorrow, relief, all tangled in that single acknowledgement. This was more than confirmation. It was betrayal. For 25 years, everyone had said there was no evidence. But there it was, not scattered across crime labs, but cocooned inside drywall. Someone had known. Someone had built this secret house. And it wasn't Maggie's imagination. Authorities scrambled to link kinetics. Who had access? Whose fingerprints were on the cavity wall? DNA was pulled from the sleeping bag, hair, skin cells. A match came back, partial but compelling. It aligned with Maggie's DNA profile. The lab's notation: probability 99.87%. Tears streamed down Vega's cheeks, and Laura's lips quivered. Confirmation turned shock into anguish. This child had not simply disappeared. She'd been hidden, alive somewhere, until time wore it away. Now came the media frenzy. Headlines screamed, "25-year-old cold case revived. Little girl found in wall." Internet comment boards, social media feeds lit up with speculation. Who did this? Why? Where was Maggie now? But no one asked the hardest question. Where is she now? Deep dive interviews aired. The original investigators, now gray and wrinkled, recounted their frustration over missing leads. Vega described the hidden corridor as a split-second chance that fell through our fingers. Laura collapsed in front of cameras, her grief raw, reflecting half a lifetime of unanswered prayers and unanswered whispers. Legal teams flocked. Lakeside Plaza's ownership, now corporate and faceless, immediately hired law firms. Internal memos revealed that the drywall cavity had been deliberately covered. Construction logs showed Michael Reynolds, a contractor who died in 2006 after a conviction for attempted abduction in another state, had not cleared it. His files were destroyed when his company folded in 1998. Now, archives were being subpoenaed, insurance claims processed, lawsuits anticipated. The police and FBI launched a full-scale reinvestigation. Yet amid that rush, nobody knew where Maggie was, or if she was alive. The possibility of remains lingered in hushed discussions. The idea that a child might have survived or expired in that cold enclosed space twisted everyone's stomach. Laura stood before reporters once again, this time more composed, determined. "They told me nothing was ever missed. They told me they looked everywhere. But she wasn't missing. She was hidden. We believed lies." Her words struck like lightning. A journalist asked, Is justice possible after this long? Laura stared at the ground. We'll find out. And her eyes, dry and fierce, didn't leave those journalists. The confirmation marked both a horrifying turning point and a moment of renewed purpose. No more silence, no more empty files, no more, "We have no leads." Instead, a storm of forensic checks, prison cell logs, financial records, phone bills from the 90s, all re-examined. The shock lay not just in what was found, but in what it meant, a shortcut to hope and a cavern of dread. Maggie Collins had not vanished by accident. She had been hidden, and someone had kept her secret all this time. As night fell again, the room behind the drywall lay open, its walls littered with detective tape. It had turned from silent grave to furious testimony. A hidden life, harvested from the dark. Now the world had to listen. Detectives reopened every file, every footprint, every thread. Carrie Hoyt, a cold case specialist brought in by the Chicago PD, stood before the map of Lakeside Plaza's West Wing, now dusted skeleton of old corridors, service shafts, and maintenance tunnels. She tapped the drywall cavity with gloved fingers. "Somebody designed this," she murmured. "Not an accident." Detectives cross-checked construction records, original blueprints, and demolition plans. They scrutinized old permits and invoices tied to 1995 to 1996, hunting for anomalies. They discovered one contractor, Michael Reynolds, had submitted requests for additional drywall in unexplained spaces. City records indicated the work had been approved by the mall's engineers but never fully inspected. There were no follow-up visits, and his business folded in 1998. Investigators subpoenaed archived material from the dissolved company, tracked down former colleagues, and turned phone books into evidence. They unearthed Reynolds had a criminal record from Ohio in 1994, attempted abduction of a 9-year-old boy. That detail had never been cross-referenced in Illinois at the time because databases were local and siloed in 1995. The case was invisible until now. Parallel lines of inquiry widened. Maggie's DNA had been found on the sleeping bag and inside the cavity. Fibers from her sweater lined the walls. That confirmed she had occupied the space. But how long? Forensic timeline experts examined the mold and dust layers, microfauna, even degraded paper fibers. They concluded she had spent at least a week there, possibly up to a month, surviving on something. But no food or water remains were found. If she'd survived days in that room, someone must have brought provisions. Detectives sorted through historical employee logs. They reconstructed mall staffing patterns in 1995, who had keys, had night access, worked East and West Wing shifts. They tracked down over 70 former employees, janitors, maintenance workers, security personnel, even Santa's helpers. Almost all were cooperative. None remembered seeing anyone suspicious, except one, Rosa Hernandez, former janitor who had a night shift route through the back halls. She'd noticed a folded door in a hallway near the loading docks, a door she assumed was a closet, until one night she heard muffled crying. Too afraid to open it, she reported it to her supervisor, a long-tenured employee known for dismissing minor complaints as the building settling. The supervisor simply noted it as a routine building noise complaint in an unofficial log, which was never formally investigated or cross-referenced with security logs. That supervisor is being re-interviewed. Next came financial records. Investigators discovered that Reynolds had leased an apartment 2 miles from Lakeside in 1995. A one-bedroom just large enough for a child and supplies. He'd paid in cash. They traced his utility records. Electricity began in November and ended abruptly in March. The timeline overlapped exactly with Maggie's disappearance. A search warrant on that address found nothing. It had been gutted during later renovations. But neighbors recalled a light on late at night, and the building's conduit tunnels connected straight to the mall's service corridors. The hidden room may have been a transfer point, with Reynolds using his maintenance access to move the child undetected, potentially disguised as a maintenance worker, after the mall closed for the night. Simultaneously, detectives revisited the original photo lineups and CCTV of 1995. A repeated face emerged, Michael Reynolds himself. His image appeared in staff footage near the Santa line, asking questions about Santa's schedule. Investigators also found he'd been present during the camera maintenance that took down the West Wing cameras. He worked on that system. His fingerprints, raised before but never matched, were now retested. The print from the locked drywall pipe handle was his. A fingerprint match at 99.9% probability. The team closed ranks around two leads. Reynolds had kidnapped Maggie, hidden her in the apartment, and when the building closed, moved her to the cavity behind the drywall. He maintained the cavity, brought food, perhaps for days or weeks, before she died, or was moved. His murder in 2006 precluded immediate prosecution, but life insurance policies taken out under a false identity raised eyebrows. Investigators found child-sized clothing and a collection of old missing persons newspaper clippings in his apartment, suggesting a long-standing obsession. Detectives hypothesized that Reynolds, isolated and potentially suffering from an undiagnosed personality disorder, was attempting to reenact or control a past trauma. Detectives obtained court orders to exhume his grave, looking for tissue samples that could confirm his presence in the room: skin, hair, blood residue. They also interviewed the surviving contractor crew. One man, Tom Willis, remembered Reynolds priding himself on building a secret room, but stopping work after Maggie disappeared. He said Reynolds confided once, "It's perfect. No one will find it for a generation." Investigators tracked down another roommate from the apartment, someone who said Reynolds had been bitter after a failed marriage, angry at the world, and fascinated by missing persons. The roommate regretted not reporting the odd toys he'd seen in the kitchen trash. By now, the narrative solidified. A meticulously planned abduction, an obsession, concealment for days, possibly weeks. But the bigger question remained. What became of Maggie? If she survived, could she still be alive? Kinematic analysts mapped possible routes. Maintenance tunnels led to underground sewage and storm drains. Exits, possibly forgotten, could connect to nearby back streets or other buildings. Search warrants were issued for every property within a 1-mile radius of those tunnels. K-9 teams and cadaver dogs swept them again. Through this effort, they located a sealed shaft under an abandoned toy store foundation 12 blocks east. It connected to Lakeside's original sewer system. Inside, they found traces of children's items, bits of ribbon, broken doll parts, fragments of paper with stick figure drawings. A cadaver dog indicated for decomposition, but the samples were inconclusive. Soil tests are being processed. The cavern runs beneath 3 city blocks. It's possible more hidden rooms exist. Simultaneously, cold case DNA analysts began sequencing any unidentified remains in the region. They also re-examined unsolved child abduction cases from 1995 to 1997 for matching profiles. Collaboration with the FBI yielded unknown matches to partial DNA. Data is confidential for ongoing probes. As detectives pulled these threads together, the case board bloomed with photos, maps, timelines, each stick and yarn like veins across the city. It had become a sprawling portrait of calculated evil and institutional failure. But for Maggie, a truth was emerging. She wasn't just missing. She was taken, held, hidden, and perhaps somewhere remembered. Monday's dawn arrived with new subpoenas, with warrants for a search of Reynolds's former home, utility tunnels, and bank accounts. Each office buzzed with hope and dread. The city's old case had reopened wounds, but also exposed a dark blueprint of how someone hid a child in plain sight. and for how long. Detectives gathered in the dimly lit command room of Chicago PD on July 2, 2020, 25 years, 6 months, and 9 days after Maggie Collins vanished. The case map covered every inch of Lakeside Plaza and surrounding blocks. In the center, marked in red marker, was Michael Reynolds, dead, yet still the pivot of the case. His obituary listed no children, no family survivors. But nothing was beyond reason now. That day, Carrie Hoyt called for a full briefing. "We've got new records. We need to reconstruct his last weeks." Files on Reynolds's apartment lease, bills, and phone records sat ready. He'd lived in that apartment from November 1995 until March 1996. Phone company logs showed regular calls, oddly brief with local payphones near the mall, and near appalling ones by freight yards. Credit card receipts forgotten by bank fraud investigators indicated small purchases. Canned soup, granola bars, bottled water, all at grocery stores within walking distance. A week after Maggie vanished, Reynolds purchased 2 Polaroid film packs and T-set components. Then, the trail went cold. Nothing until 2006, when he reappeared in Ohio for an attempted abduction. Records show he was released in early 2006, died 9 months later of an undisclosed illness. Police obtained a warrant to exhume Reynolds's body, hoping to find traces, transplanted tissue, plaques, DNA from Maggie, even evidence of blood under his nails. The medical examiner conducted the exhumation under tight security. Meanwhile, forensic pathologists found irregularities in his death certificate, vague cause, and no autopsy report. That raised immediate suspicion. In a pressurized boardroom, detectives presented projections. A man obsessed, maintaining a hidden room for weeks, evidence of provisioning, connections from the apartment to the secret space tunnel, and the Polaroids. Holt, a lead detective, summarized, "This is a man who built a home for a child, then vanished." Then came the breakthrough. The exhumation yielded a surprise. Under Reynolds's fingernails, residue, tiny flakes of drywall dust, red fibers, and microscopic food crumbs. Tissue cultures from his socks showed trace human hair believed to match Maggie's DNA. Forensic labs flagged the findings as compelling. The timeline aligned. Maggie, alive in the cavity. Reynolds handling the drywall. Contact traces preserved until death. The room erupted in tension. Officers exchanged glances. Some closed their eyes, unable to hold the gravity. Next came interviews with Reynolds's ex-wife and roommate. His ex-wife, tearful, recalled late-night phone calls where he whispered, "She's here. She's fine." His roommate confirmed he made regular nighttime grocery trips and refused to say why. Carrie Hoyt confronted her with the evidence. Her shock was profound. She said she never knew the reason until that moment. From film purchases and T-set pieces, detectives triangulated supply receipts. They traced the exact brand of teacup and identical Polaroid film box to a target 7 miles from Lakeside. Surveillance from '95, archived and enhanced, showed Reynolds stocking those same film packs at the counter. He used cash but was captured on crude, grainy footage. Photographic engineers enhanced the image. Steely gray eyes, receding hairline, a sneer on his lip. There could be no doubt. Police determined the final timeline. Maggie was taken, hidden in the apartment for 2 weeks, then moved to the drywall cavity in December '95. Reynolds provisioned the space through a narrow tunnel from the apartment shared with another contractor worker. She survived until at least early January, possibly longer, before succumbing to dehydration and cold. Reynolds then sealed the cavity and left no traces until the wall remained hidden for years. He built his own crypt. Investigators convened a private viewing for Laura Collins. She sat in a quiet meeting, staring at enlarged prints. The exhumed nail residue sample, the enhanced Polaroid of Reynolds buying the film, the floor plan linking apartment to tunnel to cavity. She trembled, tears rolling freely. She was there, she whispered. She waited. Her grief, compressed for decades, finally cracked into sobs so acute that even hardened officers stepped away, heads bowed. This was the emotional climax, the moment when the raw truth stabbed through hopes. Maggie had existed in 3 spaces: the apartment, the cavity, the wall, each representing a stage of captivity, concealment, death. The narrative collapsed. Nobody could say she disappeared anymore. She had been taken, hidden, and left to die in the darkness. Media outlets released the evidence under strict embargo. Public reaction was brutal: disbelief, outrage, sorrow. A city once numb now reeled at the idea that a child had been hidden behind drywall in plain sight. Laura's statement was concise yet shattering. "I didn't get her back, but now they can't hide her anymore." Silence followed, the calm after the storm. Yet questions remained. Would justice ever be served against a killer who was dead? Could anyone be held accountable? Mall management, contractors, officials who missed the signs? The narrative had pivoted from hope to reckoning. The tragedy was no longer unsolved. It was revealed. Detectives filed charges posthumously: falsifying construction documents, obstruction of justice, concealment of remains. Civil lawsuits were filed against Lakeside Plaza for negligence. The PD announced a new task force to find any additional hidden construction. And most poignantly, Laura Collins vowed to create a scholarship fund in Maggie's name for children affected by violence and cold case awareness. In the moment of revelation, the zenith, every lie, shadow, and silence was pierced by the light of truth. Maggie's name was no longer whispered, it was shouted. The hidden child had returned, at least to memory and to justice's ledger. And though it came too late for her, it had come. The revelation shattered the silence, but what followed was quieter, and somehow heavier. After the press conferences faded and the final Polaroid was printed across the country's front pages, Laura Collins stood alone again. This time not in ignorance, but in aftermath. She didn't return to her old job. Instead, she launched the Maggie Collins Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families of missing children and pressuring states to revisit cold cases. Her first public event was a march through downtown Chicago, carrying Maggie's photo on a white banner with the words, "No more forgotten walls." The city issued a formal apology. The mayor, flanked by the police commissioner, called it a tragedy rooted in oversight and systemic failure. Lawsuits followed. Lakeside Plaza's holding company settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. Civil penalties were imposed on the construction firm's surviving officers. New laws were introduced in Illinois: stricter background checks for contractors and mandatory review of maintenance records for public facilities with missing persons investigations. A bill known as Maggie's Law passed unanimously in the state Senate. Doug Collins never returned to Chicago. He remarried in Iowa, but sent a letter to Laura after the discovery. "I never stopped thinking of her," he wrote. "I just couldn't survive the waiting." Laura never responded. She said later in an interview, "There's no blame left." Just absence. The wall where Maggie had been hidden was dismantled entirely, brick by volunteers and survivors. In its place now stands a modest sculpture, a child's handprint in bronze, reaching upward, surrounded by mosaic fragments of shattered ceramic and glass. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "For the ones we didn't see in time." Every year on December 23rd, people gather there: families, detectives, former mall employees. Some carry candles, some bring dolls. Laura speaks briefly, always the same words: "Thank you for seeing her now." The media slowly moved on. The case stopped trending. But among the network of parents, activists, and cold case detectives, Maggie's story became a rallying cry. New initiatives launched across the country. Outdated cases reopened. Old buildings re-examined. Since the wall's discovery, over a dozen new leads have been pursued in cold cases across the region. Life resumed. Different. Reframed. Maggie was no longer a missing poster or an unsolved case. She was a name, a memory, a warning. And for those who walked past that memorial in the hollowed bones of what used to be Lakeside Plaza, the message was clear. The place where Maggie was found was only 4 meters from the main food court. The sculpture at the heart of the old Lakeside site is quiet most days. Wind moves through the broken outlines of where stores used to stand. Grass has begun to take over the parking lot, but the bronze handprint still catches light at dusk, outstretched, unfinished, reaching. No name is carved on the sculpture itself. That was Laura's choice. It should belong to all of them, she said, not just Maggie. Each year, a child who had once been missing places a flower there. Some come with parents, some come alone, some come with stories they've never said aloud. The site has become something else, more than memorial, less than sanctuary. People don't go there to mourn, they go to remember that someone was looking. In Laura's home, Maggie's room remains untouched, but on the nightstand now rests the photo they found, cleaned, preserved, framed. A little girl with a crooked smile and a plastic tea set. Just behind her, a hand no one ever identified. Laura keeps the frame turned slightly toward the window as if Maggie can look out. The last page of Maggie's notebook, retrieved from that hidden space, was returned to Laura by the police. The words are hard to read, almost illegible, but they've been transcribed, archived, and displayed in the Foundation's small office. Please don't turn off light, it says. Then one word, all in capitals. Waiting. Laura had it printed onto small cards that the Foundation now gives to families. On the front, Maggie's handprint. On the back, the message, "We don't stop looking. We keep the light on." The notebook page, water-streaked and written in a child's trembling hand, is kept in a temperature-controlled case. Once a week, Laura sits with it. She doesn't read it anymore. She just sits, letting the silence say everything. The sculpture has become a gathering place for anniversaries, remembrances, spontaneous acts of grief. Visitors have left shoes, teddy bears, candles, chalk drawings. On one cloudy morning, someone chalked around the sculpture's base the words, "She waited." We see her now. For those who followed the case from the beginning, Maggie Collins is more than a memory. She's a symbol of what was overlooked and what can still be saved. Her name appears on advocacy campaigns, investigative reform proposals, child safety training modules. In state legislatures and national committees, she is a quiet presence. The final note of her story isn't closure, it's vigilance. The ending isn't a full stop. It's a breath held in the dark, waiting for someone to turn the light back on. The world didn't save her in time. Thanks for listening to Maggie Collins's story. Not all stories have clear endings. Some just fade away. If this one stayed with you, you're not alone. Subscribe to Still Stories to hear more stories that linger. Let us know what part stuck with you or what you'd want to know next. If this touched you, hit like and share with someone who listens closely. This was Still Stories. Until next time, sometimes the quiet says the most.